Kia ora. For those who I'm yet to meet, my name's Cameron. I'm the pastor here. I'm one of the pastors here at Village Baptist, and today I get to do the next message in a series that we're exploring at the moment called Christian Basics. And for those who haven't been on the journey thus far, the Christian Basics journey with us that we've been on, the idea of the series is to explore the many different touch points of the Christian faith with the idea that by exploring them a little bit more, we might all better understand why we do the things we do. And the series started with the Bible and exploring its significance to us as God's Word. We then explored worship and how our whole life can be an act of worship. And more recently, we explored baptism and how baptism is a special way that we get to participate in the life of Christ as those who have been bound to Him, or as Paul says, hidden with Christ in God. And this morning, we shift to consider communion. And the thing about communion is that we could actually say about it just about everything we said about baptism. That it's a means of participating in the life of Christ as we remember His death and resurrection through eating the bread that is a symbol of His body and drinking the juice which is a symbol of His blood. But I don't want to preach the same message twice any more than I suspect you want to hear the same message twice. So instead of talking about what we are doing at communion, I want to share about the meaning of communion. Because communion isn't something that is just simply inserted into the biblical story during the ministry of Jesus. Communion, instead, it draws from a theme that runs throughout the Bible. Starting at the very beginning in the book of Jesus, developing layered meaning and significance through the story of Israel, drawn together in a unique way in Jesus. But even there, it doesn't stop as it looks forward in anticipation for Jesus' return. And this theme that extends from one end of the Bible to the other, this theme is the theme of divine hospitality. The hospitality that God extends to us, to His people, and to all those who are made in His image. Now, recently it was Valentine's Day. Did anyone do anything for Valentine's Day this year? Go out, say I love you to a spouse, just anything counts, anything goes. Yeah, great. Is there anyone who forgot about Valentine's Day? No, well done. Well, usually for Anna and I, we don't do a lot for Valentine's Day. But this year we did. We went to a bar in the village for dinner. We didn't stay out too late though, because I had a game planned with friends later that evening. But while we're waiting for the dinner to arrive, Anna remembered a post that she saw on Facebook earlier that morning. And it was a post about questions to ask your spouse on Valentine's Day. And so she searched out that post to look through the questions, and we'll just talk through them as we're waiting for the food to arrive. And one of those questions was something to the effect of, if you could do our married life again, what would you do differently? So I said, nothing, my dear. I said that I love the life that we have together. And everything that's happened across the last 11 years of married life led us to this point. It formed us individually and as a couple. It's led us here to this place and this community. And I like all of that. So I don't know if I'd really change much, if anything at all. But while there wasn't anything that I would change, there was something that she would change. And she said that she would have liked to have made more of an effort to have people around and extend hospitality. Because while we've done some of that across the last 11 years of being married, the awkwardness of having people around for meals when you've got flatmates with a shared kitchen and dining and lounge space as well, that just became something of a barrier to us in our minds, a barrier to having people around. And so we just didn't quite do it as much as we would have liked to. But we both agreed, looking back, that if we did it again, we would have tried a little bit harder to work around those challenges, to extend hospitality to others a little more than we did. And the reason for this is we really like having people around. We like sharing our space with others, which is probably why having flatmates worked out for us so well for so long. And I enjoy getting ready for guests because it gives meaning to all those household chores you have to do anyway, but all of a sudden it serves more of a purpose. Like tidying up the place and putting things away, vacuuming the carpet and mopping the floors, wiping down the tables and cleaning the toilet. Not in, the same sort of a thing, none of which are fun jobs, but they all become a little bit more enjoyable when they are for an anticipated guest. Well, what we read in the Bible is that God did something similar for us when He decided to host us. He began by tidying up the earth, bringing order from the chaos, and prepared a garden from what was previously formless and void. And then, having tidied the place up, tailoring it specifically for His invited guests, he laid out a table, filling the garden with every kind of fruit-bearing tree, all of which were given to His guests as food to eat and to enjoy. But God didn't prepare this table as some kind of one-time event. And what He prepared, He didn't simply share with His guests. Because on the table that He prepared, everything contained the capacity to reproduce itself. Meaning that this feast that He had prepared had the possibility of continuing indefinitely. And all of it was given to His guests, not simply shared with them. Except that was for the one fruit of the one tree. It was as if God said, welcome to my place. It's so good to have you here. Please come in and don't worry about taking off your shoes. It's fine. Just come on in. Would you like anything to drink? Can I get you something to drink? Would you like something to eat? There's plenty of options. They're all around you. Feel free to take whatever you want to eat or to drink. It's all yours to enjoy. And don't hold back, because I've already ensured that everything will be continually topped up for as long as you're with me. The only thing I ask is please just don't take the family silver. You don't eat of that one tree over there, because it's the one thing that I just want to keep for myself for the time being. But everything else, go for it. Be my guest, help yourself, and hoe in. But in the midst of the hospitality that God showered on His guests, they fixated on the one thing that He held for Himself, opening themselves up for temptation and ended up stealing from the one who had opened up His house to them and laid out a table for them. And in response to that kind of abuse of trust, God had to ask His guests to leave. But though they were no longer in His house while they'd been expelled from the garden, their inclination towards wrongdoing, it didn't leave, and they began tagging the neighborhood in a spiral of sin. It got to the point where God had to take action, to start again, to allow the world to return to the kind of chaos that it previously knew so it could be recreated and reestablished. And that's what He did through the flood. As the waters subsided and Noah's family resettled, what did God say to them? What did God say to Noah and to his family? He said to them, everything that lives and moves about will be food for you. Just as I gave you the green plants, I now give you everything. Everything. After everything that happened, God still wanted to extend hospitality to his people by giving them everything. After all the ways that his trust had been abused, his desire remains unchanged. His desire to share his presence, his generosity with us. But just because things had a kind of reset didn't mean that the old problems were entirely left in the past. God's guests continued to misbehave, and through Joseph, his people used food not as a means of hospitality, but to enslave the vulnerable in Egypt. And so, as so often the case, generations later, the tables turned and they found themselves enslaved by those they had previously enslaved. But while they were, in many respects, reaping the consequences of their actions, God in his mercy decided that he would save them. And the central symbol of his saving work, a symbol that would be reenacted year after year after year to remember what he did, saving them from Egypt, that symbol would be a meal, a divinely instituted meal known as the Passover. And so as a theme, divine hospitality began to take on new meaning. Not only was it a symbol of God's desire to share himself with us, a desire that remains unchanged in the midst of our own misbehavior, it also becomes a symbol of salvation, of God's saving work, done so that we might participate in the life he wants to share with us. But because nothing is ever easy or straightforward, while Israel had been saved by God out of Egypt, they then found themselves walking in the wilderness. The wilderness where food was rare and hard to come by. But having saved them from Egypt, God also chose and acted to sustain them in the wilderness. He did so by setting before them a new table, another table, one that was reminiscent of Eden as this table restocked itself day after day, except on the Sabbath. And it did this for the full 40 years they spent in the wilderness. At this table, a God provided quail for dinner and a bread called manna for breakfast. And manna, we're told, was white like coriander seed and tasted like wafers made with honey. Sounds like a nice breakfast cereal to me. And as the Israelites wandered, making their way to Mount Sinai, where they met with God in a special way, then were invited into a new covenant with him, a new relational commitment with him, a commitment where they would be his people and he would be their God. When the Israelites positively responded to this invitation from God, what did that involve? It involved a meal, recorded in Exodus 24. Where it says that Moses and Aaron, Nadav and Avihu, and the 70 elders of Israel went up and saw the God of Israel. They saw God, and they ate and drank. And so this symbol of divine hospitality, of God's desire to share his life with us, a desire that remains unchanged in the midst of our own misbehavior, such that he would save us from it and sustain us in it, it now becomes a sign of our participation in the relationally committed people of God. A sign of our participation in the life that God wants to share with us, as those who have accepted his invitation. And as the theme of divine hospitality, of dining with God, as it took on all these layers of meaning, it takes on one more in the book of Leviticus. There, it describes what is known as a peace offering or a fellowship offering. And in that offering, what it describes is a meal that is shared between God and his people. A meal that is shared in an act of reconciliation. in that sacrifice, some of it is burnt. That becomes God's portion. Some of it gets reserved for the priests who facilitated the offering, and the rest is eaten by the worshippers in the presence of God in celebration of their reconciliation with Him. This is the layered significance that is found in the theme of divine hospitality, layers that develop across the Old Testament, which are then subsequently picked up by the poets and the prophets, which we see in Psalm 23, right? Where David describes God as one who prepares a table for him in the presence of his enemies. And we also see it in Ezekiel 34, which imagines God stepping down to shepherd his people, acting to save them from dangerous places and bring them to good pastures where food is rich and abundant. And that point is where this theme has a turning point, where it begins to shift from looking back to Eden to looking forward in anticipation of a coming Messiah, one who would feed and dine with his people, and so also embody the fullness of the saving, reconciling, covenanting, and sustaining work of God, which is found in the many layers of meaning that are embedded in the theme of divine hospitality. So when this Messiah arrives, when Jesus steps onto the scene, what is one of the defining attributes of his ministry? That he feeds people and he dines with them. In the Gospel of Mark, Jesus feeds the 5,000. And we are told that this, alongside his teaching those people, was motivated by a compassion for the crowd. Because when he saw them, he saw that they were like sheep wandering without a shepherd. He was a shepherd to his people, and he brought them food in the wilderness. And in the Gospel of John, we are told about Jesus' first miracle performed at a wedding feast, at a feast that celebrated the start of a covenant relationship. At that wedding feast, Jesus ensured that the table would be restocked and resupplied so the feasting and celebration could continue for a little longer. And when this Messiah, when this Jesus was looking for a new symbol that would represent the completion of God's saving, reconciling, covenanting, and sustaining work, something that he would realize through his own death on the cross, what did he choose to be that symbol? He chose a meal. He chose a meal, and he once again set a table before us. One that contained two elements: broken bread, symbolizing his body that would be broken for us, and wine or grape juice that symbolized his blood that would be shed for us. The idea behind instituting this new meal, this new expression of divine hospitality at the table of communion, the idea was that whenever we shared it together, that we would remember him. Not just him as a person, not just the pain of his sacrifice, but what he achieved for us through that sacrifice. And the reality that we are now freed to inhabit. The reality that you are forgiven, saved, reconciled to the Father. The reality that you have been brought into the people of God and are free to share in God's own life. The reality that through his gift of grace and mercy and forgiveness and presence, we have been given all that we need to sustain our Christian journey right until the point when he returns. And even when he does, when Jesus does return, what we see is that the hospitality keeps on flowing as we discover yet another table that has been prepared for us. A table where we will share a meal in the fullness of God's presence, which Revelation describes as the wedding supper of the Lamb. It's within this big story, a story that stretches from Genesis to Revelation. It is here that we discover the full richness of communion. Because through it we see that what communion says to us is that you are loved, that you are wanted, that you are desired by God, and that desire doesn't change, regardless of how much you might mess up along the way. It says that God has stepped into the world for you, doing for you what you could not do for yourself, that you might be forgiven, saved, and reconciled to the Father. It says that you have a new identity. You are a child of God and a member of his family. And it says that the journey of faith that he calls you down, it says that you'll never walk that alone. Nor will you ever have to walk it in your own strength. For the journey of faith is walked in the community of faith and in the presence of God, whose mercy and grace and forgiveness is new each and every day. And so when we take communion, and when we get up out of our seats, approaching the table as a family, what we are doing is we are stepping out of any other reality that we might be tempted to inhabit and recommit ourselves to this one. When we arrive at the table and are handed the bread and receive the juice, we are reminding ourselves of who we are and how God sees us. And when we take these elements back to our chairs to consume them, eating the bread and drinking the juice, we receive the grace afresh from Christ that sustains us and carries us in our journey of faith. And with this table being laid before us, a table in all its richness and meaning and significance, the question might be, who is welcome? Yeah? Who is welcome at Christ's table? Well, when we read about who was welcome at his table, when we read about those who Jesus ate with and dined with when he was ministering on earth, who was included? It was included sinners and tax collectors, along with the righteous and the religious. Jesus dined with everyone because he wants to dine with everyone. And that includes you this morning. So as we approach a time of communion as a church family, where I invite the stewards, if they can take their places. There are 4 stations. There are 2 in the back and 2 in the front here. And as I remind you that the bread that will be offered is gluten-free, and it's just juice in those cups, no wine this morning. Having reminded you of a few of those communion logistics, let me now invite you to come to the table. To come to the table not because you must, but to come because you may. To come not because you are strong, but because you are weak. Let me invite you to come not because any goodness of your own gives you a right to come, but because you need mercy and help. Come because you love the Lord a little and would like to love him more. Come because he loves you and he gave himself for you. Come and meet with the risen Christ, for you are his child and we are his body. Let me invite you to come and receive communion in your time and when you're